everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Top 8 Podcast. I'm Nikki, and again with me is my co-host Tyler. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Hi again, everybody. Was slightly more prepared this time for talking.
Yeah, hopefully. And for today's episode, we're going to be doing something new. We're going to be reviewing a game from an actual viewer of ours. And we'll also be discussing how to determine the team comps that you might want to commit to in any given game and how you want to commit to that. And the last thing that we'll be doing is something fun. We'll be trying to do our top 8 first carousel items for the current patch 10.3. So just to get started, I'll jump right in. We'll be doing the bot review. Yeah.
I was in a Reddit thread on the competitive TFT Reddit, and there was a gentleman there who was having some difficulty figuring out why he was struggling to make the jump from Plat 1 to Diamond. So in my personal channel a couple of weeks back, I went through and just reviewed a couple of games for him. Just talked for 2 hours about, what he could be doing better, basically. And he was kind enough, though. He actually appreciated the advice, even though I felt like a jerk for 85% of it. And yeah, he was kind enough to go ahead and let us use one of his games for our show this week. So that's what we've got
great.
here. We're just gonna get that started. This is on patch 10.2, so it's from the last patch, and we're right at the first carousel. We did want to talk briefly. He's got the TF Tactics overlay, which you'll be able to see in the lower left corner.
Yeah, bubble.
Yeah, and it helps you with item combinations. It can do some things as far as helping you determine team comps and stuff like that. But realistically, I don't use anything like that anymore. There was another overlay as well do you use anything like that, Nikki, or?
I personally don't. I just try to, because now there's the percentages for each level. I just try to remember that. And I have the items on the back of my head, so I don't really want to have an overlay to deal with. But I know a lot of people prefer it, so it's just totally up person to person.
Right, yeah. I think myself, I've got, the overlay pretty well, or not the overlay, the items pretty well memorized. So
it's good for seeing percentages if you're not on that certain level, for sure.
It is, yeah. And so here we end up picking up the BF sword there off the first carousel.
Yeah, which is always a great item, especially for the last patch, which was super ranger heavy,
Yes, yeah. And so we are going to run this at 2x speed for most of the game. Last episode rather, if you watched, we had a bunch of weird jump cuts. So we're just going to try some things out, see how this works best.
Yeah, and if anyone has any advice or suggestions regarding this, we would love to hear it. Just trying to test the waters out with everything.
For sure. Let's see.
Yeah, so getting some good, decent early game items definitely can make a GA if you wanted to.
Yeah, as soon as I see sword and chain vest, I'm all over a GA in a lot of games. And he's doing an okay job of he's buying the pairs up that he's been presented with. He hasn't really gotten any gold, so he hasn't had much of an opportunity to econ yet. Here at 2-1, he's doing a little bit of scouting, which is nice. Taking a look at what everybody's playing early game. And oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just saying that it's great that he's picking up the pairs right now because he doesn't want to be too greedy. I know some players will just sell everything on the board to get that 10 gold, but he has an opportunity later.
Yeah. And I mean, here, I think he could sell out those woodland units. He would have to sell off the 2 LeBlancs for sure, but he could get to 10 gold. But I think holding on to woodland here is with 2 LeBlancs and 2 Maokai already is probably worth waiting around to hit 10 gold.
Yeah, I think because he had that Talia pair, And he might just be thinking maybe I'll go some sort of mage comp. The picking up the woodlands with Talia and eventually transition to maybe like Vlad with the ocean buff is really great. And you see he's sold to 10 here, which is great. He doesn't see that he's going to play Kog'Maw for very long since he isn't getting any other predators. So definitely the right choice here.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would have done differently is I probably would have made some kind of item by this point. He's got
Yeah.
Shojin or GA, both of which are very playable items, which I for sure would have made one of by now.
Now we're going on to the next stage. I think definitely now he's making the item for sure, but I think maybe he was just waiting to see what units he was hopefully going to get during the first two stages. Yeah.
And the one thing that I'll note is that when he made Shojin there, he made it sword and then tier, and he could have made it the other way around to mana bug, right? Not that it's going to make a huge difference right there, but yeah.
It could get that ult off faster. If people don't know, the mana bug immediately lets you cast, or it gives you the mana to cast.
Yeah. And then he sells down to 20 here. I think there's some arguments for possibly keeping a Nazir, but selling to 20 is good too.
I think early on, it's a bit too early to keep it. Maybe it's just more. I personally would sell the Azir just to hopefully get that money.
Yeah, I think that's never going to be wrong to sell there, right? That's always going to be good.
Because he'll probably just hit it if he's win streaking and also econing. So and he picks up everything in the shop just to even out or lower the odds of getting those units later on, which is smart as well.
Yeah, and now he's open to the possibility of like hitting some stuff there as well. Here he gets he picks up a Thresh, which it looks like he actually wants to hang on to.
Yeah, considering that he has the Talia and the LeBlanc, he's definitely going some sort of mage comp just because of that Shojins as well.
Yeah, and I like Thresh as a unit to like hold when you're playing Woodlands. He's just a good, like, I think if you can start to get, like, if you 2-star a Thresh, then that's something you can look to replace a Woodland unit with later, because he's good frontline, and I feel like the primary thing you lose when you come off of Woodlands is like a lot of frontline with how much,
the difficulty with playing Woodlands is that while they are super strong early, it's harder to transition out of them because you're like, oh, these units are doing so well, but then they fall off really quickly.
Yes, yeah, they really do. Once Druid regen isn't overcoming the incoming damage anymore, they really start to fall off. And that's going to happen as you get higher cost units. It happens as you get more combined items, and then like you start to two-star your units as well. All of those things will contribute to Woodland.
So positioning is good. He's been scouting pretty often, so able to keep that win streak, which is really great.
He doesn't really have any other items I would necessarily make right away. What about do you think there's anything?
Zephyr, I suppose.
I would maybe make a Zephyr. Yeah, that's the one thing I was thinking.
But he might just be so here he's thinking maybe I can get a more damage item. So hopefully like a Morello's or something off of Carousel. He is last pick, but maybe he has a chance. So he makes a Zephyr here, obviously.
He does.
Which is a great item still.
Yeah, Zephyr's good early, really good late. When you're trying to like you're in those like top 4 and you have more control over like your positioning, and you have a better idea of what opponents you're playing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So he's on the 6-win streak, and in my head, when I'm playing like this and I'm doing so well, I'm thinking, okay, I'm probably going to focus a lot on leveling so I can hit those high cost units and tank more of my health and to trade. I don't know if you would do the same as well.
So, I guess I sometimes have the opposite thought, which is I'm doing so well, I'm willing to spend gold to keep this win streak gold coming in. Because if you can spend 20 gold if you're getting the 3 gold income from a 7-win streak, and it still like evens out in terms of the amount of gold you get every round. So potentially I would have rolled down a little bit at 6 to try to protect that a little more, and to extend it out to 7. But I think, you know, it's working out for him. And those are just both potential options that you have there.
Yeah. And considering that he is scouting a lot, he might just feel a lot stronger than the entire lobby. So there's a good reason for him to try to keep that streak going.
Yeah. And I'm going to just slow down the playback a little bit here,
Mm-hmm.
because we're approaching round 4 and we still have a bunch of woodland units. So one of the primary things I know we want to talk about is the transition off of woodland, because it's
Yeah,
difficult
exactly.
and there's a lot more to talk about there. So we kind of breeze through the first half of the game, but the second half we're going to
Try to focus a little more to talk about what we could be doing as we are scaling into the mid late game ish.
Yeah, and the first thing that I'm thinking already, if this is my game, is I've got Yorick, I've got Annie. I would have bought this Azir right here, probably, or both Azirs. That
Yeah,
pair
definitely
super
some
fast.
type of some Sin game, just
Right,
because he doesn't have any of the ocean units for like Vlad or Syndra, and it's also not an ocean map, so you can get that Kiana buff, which is really good for Mountain as well
right.
if you're playing some Sin. Yeah.
Yeah, but he opts to sell the Yorick there in favor of playing Maokai. And I mean, he gets to 2 Warden this way, but I think at this point is where you and I would start to look at transitioning off. And
Yeah, because it's going to start falling off. While it did carry him this far, people who've tanked the health are probably or are high rolling basically are probably hitting the units that they want to hit, and it might start getting dangerous basically.
right, yeah, so we'll see in the coming
And
rounds like what we
also
do.
choosing to keep the Annie but not the Yorick, I guess, is something that I'm a bit more confused by, just because if you're playing Annie, I'd imagine that you want to play the other summoners, but
Right,
so he buys the Azir, but I'm not sure if that's just for the. Okay, he sells it
he immediately
again.
sells it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it may just be like, so one thing that I've noticed, there were a couple of like bigger competitive TFT events,
Mm,
and I don't know the exact ones off the top of my head, but I remember watching them and I remember like reading like Reddit comments and things like that. And when players were playing Sumsons in these events, commentators thought it was like this new incredible comp. Like,
some sense.
yeah, but I think like
Huh.
Sumsons is maybe because it is a little bit weirder than, it's not as like straightforward as some of these other comps, right? You're not
Yeah.
like, you're playing like summoners and assassins and kind of like the best summoners and assassins that you get basically.
Hmm.
And you know, you can play Annie or Yorick or Azir, um other stuff sometimes, but uh primarily, you know, you're playing similar looking things. But yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if maybe if there's just like he doesn't know that that's an option to him here. He's not like familiar with the comp. He's not seeing it in some
Oh,
of
I see.
these
I see.
like lower
Yeah.
level lobbies. Yeah, it took a long time to get to that. Sorry, but
That's fine.
but yeah, I don't know if it's
I
just
mean,
not as
more
familiar.
specifically, I think Sumson kind of fell off in the previous patches just because of a lot of the nerfs to it, and then people stopped playing. But especially now in the current patch, it's super strong, and
Yeah,
it's one of those very flexible comps.
yeah,
And here, I know that he wants to stay above the 50 gold, but with that 9-win streak, I would personally opt to level to 8 and roll down, because it's a fast 8 game. And when I say fast 8, it's one of those situations where, okay, I'm streaking, I have a lot of gold, and if I level to 8, I can get those really high percentages for the 8 cost and scale my comp so that hopefully I can keep up with everyone. Keeping the LeBlanc at this stage is going to start falling off. So that's why I am starting to get a little worried. That's all. But he did get so many rod items, so it's perfect for a mage game, for example, or if he wants to do
right.
a Lux carry. Yeah.
And I think like right here, I would have heavily considered, even though it's only a 1-star Amumu and a 1-star Thresh, like
Mm-hmm.
selling, you know, the Ivern and the Maokai at least, and getting those in to go up to 4 Wardens here. Um,
Right. Yeah.
you know, because then you're putting the gold. You've already got the gold sitting on your bench from Amumu and Thresh, which is, it's only 7 gold, so it's not costing you an interval or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But you're just, you're taking gold off the board and putting it back in your gold supply there by selling Ivern and Maokai, and you're putting, I don't know the raw stats, but I've got to think Amumu's just better. Like, 1-star Amumu is probably close to or as good as 2-star Maokai, right?
Yeah, for
Like,
sure. And that's just because I personally feel like I wouldn't play Woodlands past stage 3 just because they fall off so quickly. And here he's rolling down a bit. I would definitely try to use the keyboard more often. I know that when I first started out, I didn't use that a lot and it really hindered my play. And if you're able to roll down faster with that high APM, it's going to make the game go a lot faster for
yeah.
sure.
And if you didn't catch it, we rolled past 2 Kianas, which would have been like, I think, a pretty strong option to replace,
Mm-hmm.
to look to start to maybe replace possibly Talia if you don't end up going 3 mages with her.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like to play Talia super late typically. And now we've got 2 more Azirs in the shop, so like, hindsight obviously, but we would have been in a really good like some spot here, I think.
Mm-hmm,
We would
exactly.
have just been really looking for Kha'Zix, and then if we could find a Zed later, that'd be great. But you don't even
Yeah.
really, you don't 100% need Zed to play some Sens,
Yeah. And he's not being punished super hard, so he could just continue to greed, I would say. But around that, I personally would just try to at least roll down a little more to hit higher cost units, just because the woodlands are starting to fall off. But
Yeah.
he's still pretty high. He's still first place, so
Right. And I mean,
yeah.
he definitely he does have, HP that he can trade for gold
Mm-hmm.
here essentially. Um, but at some point we want to, like you said, strengthen these units and certainly, I mean, we both kind of know what's coming, that we're going to level to 9 here.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're on 4 Warden. We've pulled Ivern and Maokai, which I think we could have done earlier, but obviously we didn't get like super punished for not doing it.
Which is
Um,
fine. He doesn't now, so it's fine.
yeah.
But
Well,
I definitely would put the wardens in just because they are better units and there's that clear synergy.
yeah.
And I know here he chooses to put the Morello on Annie, and that's personally something that I would be against just because I'm at level 8 with 50 gold. I'm going to roll down, and I should be rolling down basically to hopefully find a better carry for those for that item.
Right.
But
I mean, that would be
it's not
really
too bad, yeah.
right. Well, I mean, Syndra is in play, and so Syndra does a pretty good job with Morellos, right?
Although it's a Syndra 1, so I wouldn't put it on a Syndra 1.
Well, my thought was I would put it on Syndra 1 if I thought I was going to sell Syndra 1. Like if I just wanted to, if I wanted to make
For just
Morellos
that round,
for a
yeah.
round, but also we've got a Mumu 1 in play, and
Exactly,
we're not
yeah,
selling a
yeah.
Mumu, and a Mumu does great with
With Morello,
Morellos,
yeah.
and we don't want to have to sell Annie. I mean, if like honestly, I think I would have put it on Syndra, and then I would have maybe looked for a brand, and then I would have been on, 4 Warden, 3 Inferno with Annie and a Mumu out there. And we can sell one of our mages and be on 3 mage still. So I don't know. I guess I wouldn't have
I
put it on
think
Sendra. I would
I
have left it
personally
on the
would
bench for a
probably
round.
just put it on the Amumu, and then I wouldn't play Brand in this situation per se, just because I know that because of the ocean nerf, yeah, the ocean nerf, Brand takes a bit too long to cast sometimes.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just dependent on what you hit in the shop. But because we aren't able to see that, it's hard to say what really is the best decision here.
Right. I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think Brand would be okay personally with
Mm-hmm.
the LeBlanc items on him, because he'd have Shojin to help him get, he'd have that little bit of mana towards his first alt.
Mm-hmm.
But then you'd have the Shojin Runins combo to get future alts. But you're right, you probably don't even need to play. You can probably just put that Morello's straight on a Mumu regardless, because you've got like
Yeah.
whatever carry you put in, you can just put those LeBlanc items straight on that carry.
And I personally like to play with maybe like a double carry. So, for example, when you're playing Brand, you also want to play like a Singe. So maybe there's two people doing the damage output. So when you put a Morello on a Mumu, there's a better spread than if you're just stacking one Brand if he just dies instantly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I also prefer having 2 units. So I mean, you can see like we're at 65 health still. We're still not super punished, but we're also just like not that strong. We've got
Yeah, we're kind of just sitting, waiting for something in the shop when I mean, at this point, I would just level to 9 and then roll all of my gold to see what I could hit, and then
right.
yeah.
I mean, I think even before this though, like I don't think I would have been leveling to 9 yet with so many 1-star units on the board.
Yeah, of course.
I would have tried to roll down. I think it's really important to have like a stable level 8 in before you go to level 9. Or I mean, if you're going to go to level 9, like you were saying, do it faster and be decisive about it so that you're rolling down all that gold.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people get stuck in this like slow leveling thing, right? Where they're like, I don't want to break my econ and go down below 50. So he does actually level here.
Yeah, and he sees a lot of good units in the shop, and I would just keep rolling because at this point you want to scale and saving that money. What are you exactly saving for?
Right.
So that's yeah.
Um,
And I also noticed that he stopped scouting around this time.
yeah.
And I believe, or I personally think that the later in the game it is, the more you should be scouting, just because everyone has those team comps ready, and you want to see if there's any Zephyrs or if someone's, positioning specifically against you. Yeah.
Right, positioning against you. You also, I like to look and see like what is assassin positioning for the other teams, like what corner are they likely to jump to, and then I like to look at like for my carries based on like how they do their damage. Are there problematic matchups where like is one of my carries just gonna like immediately start hitting, Taric 2 with 3 items on it, and then never going to get through that Taric and deal damage to anything else.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, you want to have those things in mind. So like we're starting to kind of transition a little bit, but right now the time, like we've got 34 gold and time and still several 1-star units, or units that should be replaced just by better units at this point. Like Mountain is okay, but I think Mountain falls off quite a bit late game. I think a lot of people would agree with that assessment, but
I think like Malphite is a great unit, and I
yes.
wouldn't sell him, but definitely valuing valuing that Talia when there aren't any mages in, and just for a random
for
mountain buff really isn't worth when you could be playing, for example, Mystic, especially against this opponent here. They are doing so much magic damage that Mystic would be really helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so we're going in here. Let's see.
And the difficulty here is that like he was in first place for a really long time, but suddenly he's getting really heavily punished once everyone's gotten online, and he still hasn't scaled. So here he's deciding, oh, should I sell that Singe? And I personally would have put the items on Malphite onto Singe. I know he has a pair, but Singe is going to do a lot more with those items, even a Mumu,
Yeah, Amumu. Nami is a good carrier for.
I think Nami 2-star is better, but
right.
Yeah.
But I mean, we'll see here. He goes and he mage caps that, where we could have mage capped, I don't know, Nami, or probably taken a better item. I know in that carousel, there was like a Shojin, an RFC, a Redemption, things that might have just been overall better.
Yeah, and he gets that Taric too, but the hard part here is that there isn't a real carry. So he could have played that light Lux since he already had a pair, and then thrown in a Soraka for that light buff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much damage it would do, but it certainly is a carry of some sort versus just 1-stars.
Right.
Yeah.
When I first saw him pick up that mage cap, I thought maybe he wanted to play Mage Lux.
Yeah, which is super strong, and
Right.
she'll go off like that. But of course, he doesn't even have any mages except Talia, and so maybe he would need to scramble a little more to play something.
He had Syndra in at some points as
Oh, he had
well.
Cinder. I thought he took her. Sorry, I was.
He may have taken her out at some point,
Uh-huh.
but I remember looking when he got the mage cap right before, and he had 2 or 3
Oh,
mages,
okay.
like there or the round before there.
Okay. Yeah, I missed it.
No, I mean, yeah, we went through that pretty quickly. So yeah, we like lost the game with a fair like 30 gold or something like that still.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I noticed was just how difficult that transition ended up being. He spent a lot of time like moving units and trying to figure out where to place his items and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about real quick was what you can do during combat, right? You can place those items during combat. So
Yeah.
when you're trying to like the run up to the round, you want to position your units and you want to roll in the shop, because once the round starts, nothing you do in the shop matters. So you want to spend that gold before the round starts, buy up everything you can, be as strong as you can on the board, as well positioned, and then you can go in and start to look at, where you want to place those items. The same thing with scouting. Like you want to scout ideally during combat, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you do have some control obviously with positioning over what happens in combat, but you don't have control over the fight RNG or anything like that. So watching that is especially in the early game and like mid game, not that much benefit, right? You don't learn that much from watching combat. Then you might want to watch combat at the end of the game when you're in like a 1v1 or
Mm-hmm.
there are 3 players left or whatever, to see like what's
to see
happening,
maybe if
how you
my
can
comp
affect
is doing well against this guy.
right.
Yeah.
And then like what specifically is happening when it starts, like who's targeting who, stuff like that you're going to want to figure out. But yeah, just kind of when you're prioritizing in your head, what do I do heading into a round, definitely position, and then anything you want to do with the shop, get that done with enough time to get the units on the board in position. And then like
Mm-hmm.
you can make your items during combat. If you miss out on like 1 or 2 seconds with the unit without a death cap on it or something, they probably didn't even ult yet. Like a lot of items,
Yeah.
spell damage items don't even matter until they ult, so you've got all the time for them to build up that mana to put them on there. And that's just something I've seen from a couple of people. And
Yeah, and personally for me, when I'm in that 15 seconds or however long it is, I'm just pressing that D button, just trying to find the units that I need, and I'm just going, okay, really fast. Okay, I'm gonna do this, and then just put it in, and I can put on that Zephyr, maybe cheese the Zephyr even, like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. All right, let me.
And as we're talking about the VOD, I know we covered a lot of different topics, just depending on what he ended up doing. But we wanted to focus more specifically on how to, I guess, decide a certain comp. And I could definitely see that he was trying to go some AP route when he picked up like the Woodlands and the Shojins and Talia. But I think it was definitely the transition there that got the game from a first to like a fourth, I believe. Yeah, it was a fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we did. I guess that's good to note. We did still come in top 4, right? We still
exactly, which is great.
We still like I said something the other day about like getting 4th place is kind of like when you open a bottle of Coke and the cap says you get you get a free Coke or something. It's like a little bit of a reward, but mostly you just get to do it again, right? Like
it's more of like a learning experience. You get a bit of LP, yeah,
right. You get a little bit of LP.
Great.
You didn't lose anything, and you get a free try. You get your next game to get a first or a second to like really bump up that LP.
So as we're talking about that, we just wanted to talk more specifically about deciding a comp. So again, I said that there was that AP comp, and that's something that you're keeping in mind. But as you're playing the game, I would say that every progression, every round, you always want to be thinking of what your next step is. So I think where everything started getting more difficult is that when we were around stage 4, there still wasn't like a clear cut path. We still had that LeBlanc. So a lot of the times we'll just be going over some general tips to see how the game sort of guides you in terms of what comps you should be playing. So, for example, early items. So, if I get a tier, for example, that game, if he got that tier, the sword, and the chain vest, what does that leave me with the types of comps that I could be playing?
Right. And I mean, in the current meta, like the first couple of things I think of are like GA is really good, Shojin is really good. What comps play GA and Shojin? Because you don't really want to make Zeke's Herald unless you have to. You don't really want to start the game with Redemption. You can. It's actually a good early item, but it's not going to be as strong over the course of the game. I don't think. There's only like
the value that it brings isn't super great. Yeah.
Right. I mean, basically, unless you're trying to play something with Zed at the end, he's the only champion that like really highly values Redemption.
Yeah.
Right?
But then that's like you're planning for a Zed, which is a 5 cost, and you don't know if you'll even get it. So
yeah,
that's
don't
where
do that.
more the dangerous plays are. But if you get like a rod and a belt, then it's a Morello's. But if you keep in mind, okay, I'm building this Morello's, then you're definitely going down some type of AP comp, you know?
Right. And
you don't necessarily have to, but you already need that item. So
let's see. I'm just trying to think what else we could have made there. We don't. We had a chain vest and not a belt, did we?
Yeah. Chain vest.
So, anyways, you I guess the thing you don't really want to make there then is Frozen Gauntlet, which is only good on like 2 champions and not very good on them. So, but yeah, basically you had 2 really viable items there. I think I would be looking at like trying to go down either a Sumsins path, because I think Kiana, who I want to play in Sumsins, is going to be really strong with just a Shojin, and you can pick her up kind of early, put that on her early.
Especially on that mountain map as well.
Yeah, getting early, if you hit a Talia and then you hit an early Kiana, and you've got like, you know, stage 2, early stage 3 mountain, that's going to help you pick up some wins or have some, you know, better losses at very least.
Yeah.
It's just good.
And I noticed, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I noticed that he made the item around, I think it was 2-2 or 2-3. I personally would, if I got those items, I would definitely just make an item on stage 2-1, just because I personally think there's no point in waiting that extra round when I could have done it earlier. But doing it at 2-2 is fine as well. I definitely would not try to greed all 4 of those item components up until Carousel, just because there is a good item there and there's nothing you really need to necessarily greed for unless you're trying to open fort or something. But he has 4 item components, so there's really no need.
Yeah, and as far as like just how early items help you determine what comp you want to play, like right now, some of the better early items I think, aside from what we've discussed, are like Morello's, which is flexible, but usually you're going to want to play a caster who can spread Morello's around really well. So I mean, Singed is an option, Amumu is an option, but they're both 5 cost units. You don't want to depend or rely on them. You know, you're looking for options like Brand or gosh, who else is going to be good with the Morellos in mid game? Syndra early, Nasus early, yeah, some of that stuff to transition into your late game. I think we talked a lot about that previous episode as well.
Yeah, previous episode.
Static Shiv, Rangers are really strong right now. Static Shiv is good in the, you know, early game as well. So you see that, you might start to think about Rangers. Any other items that you think like when you see right off the bat start to point you in a direction?
Yeah, and if you aren't getting super great early items, or you notice that you only got 1 item and you need to maybe open fort a little to hopefully get a better carousel pick and wait till Krugs, a lot of the times you can also try to see what the shop is giving you. If you're seeing a lot of units, for example, that might point you towards a certain comp that could use the component that you have, then maybe you got 2 bows, then that's probably a ranger game, hopefully, or maybe like a Sumsins kind of strat.
Yeah, usually, like you're saying, by around the time you hit Krugs, you want to have some idea of what you can combine those items you have now into. that are gonna, you know, be good as you continue to develop your comp. So like you said, if you've got 2 bows, you might be looking for some tears or swords or gloves or whatever to complete those into items that are going to be good on rangers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, so talking more specifically about units, like I said, sometimes you're not going to get super great items till Krugs, and you can use the units that you're getting in the shop to hopefully cruise or basically not lose health during the early game, because you can't really control some of that RNG. So hopefully that you can just use some of the 2 costs and 2 stars, early 2 stars, to hopefully find something. I personally would not try to roll at this point in time, early game, just because you are wasting your money, because you want to have enough econ so that you can get to that certain level and also have enough money to buy and 2-star those units. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like you're saying, I mean, sometimes you'll be at Krugs and you'll get through Krugs and you'll still have items that don't particularly look like the items you want for any particular build. And that's like what you're saying. You can start to use these I think especially like, you know, the like after Krugs, you'll start to see some 4 stars pop or 4 cost units pop up. Once you hit 7, you can see some 5 cost units pop up. So if you still aren't decided, those are going to be like the building blocks for deciding on a particular comp, as well as like if you get early 3 cost units like Azir, Kindred, Kiana that you can manage to actually 2-star, those can help you figure out like what 4 cost units and what possible 5 cost units you want. And are there like particular 4 cost units or 3 cost units even that like start to point you in a particular direction when you're looking at what comp you want to do?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I try to pick up units that are relevant to the items that I get. Sometimes, obviously, I'm going to get some really bad items. And at that point in time, I'm just thinking in my head, okay, I'm playing for like a top 6 or top 5, not like a top 4 sometimes, because, items are really impactful to your game. And I just try to pick up strong units that could potentially use it. So, for example, Azir, super good, or Kindred points you towards that shadow route. Kiana is just a good like 3 stars, so I like to pick her. 3 costs. I like to pick her up, but you know, there's a lot of. I like to play flexibly, so that's where I typically try to see what's the game is giving me versus trying to go a specific route. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know for me it's like I kind of like we talked about in the game we watched. We saw we're on Woodlands, right? And Woodlands is not going to be our end comp. We did not try to 3-star any of our Woodlands, so we know those aren't going to be our end comp. But we hit at one point in time we had the option to have Yorick, Annie, and Azir, and we talked about how that would start to point us towards summoners, and specifically like some sins or summoners and assassins is like what we think is, and I think a lot of people would agree, is kind of one of the probably like the best summoner build, just because of some of the synergies it gets with like Kha'Zix and Azir giving you Desert in particular, and the fact that you can play a later Zed who is both a summoner and an assassin to round out those synergies. But also, like, if you don't have a comp going and you hit an early Olaf, if you can somehow, come up with adequate items in your head based on what's in your bench to have like a strong Olaf or strong berserkers in general, maybe that's a berserkers. If you hit some early ashes or early twitches, maybe those are going to point you at rangers. If your items, you want to look at your items and have some way into the build through those items, even if you're depending on a lot of stuff down the line. At some point you have to determine like what kind of comp you're going to play.
Yeah, exactly. And for certain comps, especially if you're going like lights or predators, a lot of the time that requires basically just seeing what the shop gives you. If you're seeing a bunch of Kog'Maws, maybe some Warwicks and Rek'Sais, and you have that good like predator start with a Ludens maybe, then I would definitely try to save up money for that. But if you're not seeing, maybe you see one Kog'Maw, but you have good Kog'Maw items, then I personally would not go that route, because it could just turn into a fast 8, like fast bottom 8, yeah, in that situation, just because you can't really fight the RNG that the game is giving you.
Right. And
Yeah.
sorry. One of the other things I was going to say is that just like when you are using units, and I think we talked about this a little bit, to determine what your comp's going to be, it usually is going to happen a little bit. I mean, it can happen early in the game if you get flooded with lights or flooded with woodlands or flooded with predators. You might determine, okay, we're going to hyper roll this game. But if you're not playing a hyper roll comp, usually that's going to happen later in the game when you start to see those 4 cost and 5 cost units. And then sometimes you have to make a like determination based on the units you have as well.
Yeah.
Can you actually pivot? If you get Olaf and you're on like 30 health and 20 gold and you've got like half a predator unit, or not half a predator, like no berserker units, basically is what I was getting at. If you don't have berserkers already, that might not be a pivot you can realistically make, right? So you have to, you're always going to have to take in all of these considerations when you're determining like what you're going to do with your comp. You've got to make sure you have time to hit your comp and you're not just playing like a weird hodgepodge of units. But you know, at the same time,
yeah. And oh no, sorry, keep going.
I was just gonna say, at the same time, you do want to play what's strong that you're presented with so that you stay alive for as long as possible, like you were saying, to hit that 6, to hit that 5th, so that you're not taking the big LP loss and you get another shot to try again next game.
Yeah. And especially for something like predators, if you're rolling down and you're seeing, if you're trying to play hyper roll, if you're rolling down and you're seeing, oh wait, there aren't even any Kog'Maws in my shop, I would stop at a certain point and realize where you can like basically save your money, because if the shop isn't giving it to you, then it's not smart to just keep sending it. And because you can still transition out of Preds early on at that Krugs round, just because it's still very early, like fairly early in the game, and you're not committed to it if you do want to change.
Right. Yeah. If
Yeah.
you definitely, you don't want to end up on no econ and no units with a hyper roll, right? So you've got to manage that for sure.
Yeah, and also a lot of the times when you are playing comps like that, you really need to scout what the lobby is showing. So if there are 3 different Predator players, different Light players, and even during the Berserker meta, how hard is it to hit that Olaf too, you know, that kind of thing. So you want to see how the lobby is doing in terms of deciding your comp, for example.
For sure, yes. Let's see. And then I know one of the other things we wanted to talk about is the particular map you're on, as well as like how your lobby is playing, because you have to I think the map we wanted to talk a little bit less about, but your overall lobby, like the particular game that you are in, will have some effect on how you want to determine your comp, whether it's because your comp is overcrowded. Like if you're thinking, all right, I'm going to go early predators, and then, you know, obviously when you're going to determine how your lobby is going to affect your comp, you're going to scout. That's like the primary thing there, right? So you're scouting around, and, you know, a couple of rounds before Krugs or whatever, you've picked up a decent predator start. But so if like 3 other people, you don't want to hyper roll there, because if those other people hyper roll, you're just all going to end up with, like we said, no econ and no units, basically. So there still will be options to play predators, you know, without the hyper roll, but you might just want to bear that in mind. And then the other thing is, like, in the late game, you have the option of adding in certain like smaller synergies, things like we talked about in the game we watched. We talked about Mystic, and so that's one of the other things that the lobby is going to determine. And, you know, we'll kind of dig into that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, and typically you play that Mystic as sort of like a late game thing, because everyone who's playing that AP comp is starting to has basically scaled, and you want to mitigate some of that damage. But if your lobby has a bunch of like Twitch players, then maybe you don't really want to be playing that Mystic, because you could be adding something else. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why just scouting in general at all parts of the game is just really important. It's definitely an extra thing for you to keep in the back of your head, but it will definitely help improve your gameplay just because you want to make sure that you're improving your odds as much as possible. And in games like this, where there is an RNG factor, you need to basically take control of what you can do the best of, and scouting is just one of those things.
Yeah, one of the things to keep in mind when you're scouting and you're looking, okay, are too many people playing this comp that I want to play, that I already have some units for, that I have some items for, are the size of champion pools, or I think or unit bags rather. I think I've heard them called bags by some of the Riot people. And so your 1 and 2 cost units, there's a lot of room. I think I don't actually know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there's a lot of room for numerous people to have 2 stars of the same 1 and 2 cost units. But where it starts to narrow down a little bit more is like 3, 4, and 5, which I think 3 cost units there are, I believe, 16 of each. And then it's 12. I know it's 12 4 cost units and 10 of each 5 cost unit. So if someone has a 3-star kindred, that should be 9 of the 16 kindreds gone, right? So
you can technically just count at the same time as well, but only if you have time.
Yeah, so I mean, literally in some games, like if you're going to want to play kindred carry and you've got 1 kindred and you see other people are playing kindred, it is worth your time to go through the lobby and count how many other kindreds are out there. And if it's like 10 other kindreds in play, then you've got to hit 5 like 2 of these last 5 kindreds before other people snatch them up, which is not impossible, but not super likely. So that's like just something to bear in mind there.
And also, if you're in that late game and you have some gold and you're thinking maybe I'll 3-star this unit, and you see a lot of people still have it on their board, save your money till they die.
Yeah.
So that it's back in the pool. Otherwise, you're just rolling for nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I know you mentioned the map thing, of course. I just wanted to go back on that. Basically, the point was just that obviously some comps are going to be weaker on certain maps, but definitely don't let that deter you from playing what the game is giving you. So you can still play Rangers on a cloud map.
Right.
It's going to miss maybe, but you're still going to be super strong. Like there's only it's only a certain percentage.
Right. The idea there being that cloud map gives 2 cloud spaces, so you're going to have additional dodge on those 2 units, but also because Kiana is the same element as the map, you're going to have easier access to cloud buff there. You can play like Kiana and Janna, so if Yasuo is not in your comp, you have a little bit easier access, so your opponents have easier access to it, obviously. But like you said, if you're getting strong items, strong units from the shop to complete a comp, I wouldn't let the map influence you too much. I know one of the other bigger things is like if you're playing Inferno already, 6 Inferno is a better consideration on the Inferno map because Kiana makes it much more accessible. She's a strong unit that you want to play, and and we talked about Mountain map playing Kiana early on that, but Mountain usually is not going to be like an in-game comp consideration for me, at least. Right? I think for a lot of people, it's great if you can get it, but Kiana and Malphite are just both good units, so you'd probably play them anyways if that's what you're going to play. Right?
Yeah, and also regarding the map, I would just try to think about it in terms of what comp options you're opened up to and what you are limited to as well. So like you said, the Inferno map gives you that 6 Inferno with that Kiana much easier, so you don't have to play like a Diana, for example.
Right.
And for Ocean, you can play for Ocean much easier, and you don't have to play like a Vlad,
Right.
Like these are just 1 cost units. You don't want to be playing them so late in the game. But you also sort of need to consider other things like, oh, I'm on an Inferno map. Is that super good if I'm trying to play some sort of some sin comp? Like what direction is that Inferno buff giving me in some sin? I don't know. It's kind of confusing, So things like that. to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I don't know. I like it with some Zen because I want to play a Moo if I get him, basically, as part of my front line. And then, I've got. I probably play Annie.
Yeah, but then what are you taking out instead for that Amumu?
Probably, I don't know. In my mind, maybe Zed. I don't know. I just, if I don't have Zed items, maybe Zed. But yeah, but I mean, like you said, you've got, I don't know, you've got all those options. I think another thing that we didn't even talk about in the notes though, but concerning your map is like sometimes I will give consideration to what comp I'm playing based on where the actual elemental hexes show up.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because like if I've got a frontline hex, then I'm like, okay, depending on what hex it is, like maybe that's good for a specific tank, or if you've got like good central backline hexes, you're maybe thinking like, okay, what carry can take advantage of this, backline ocean space or backline inferno space, stuff like that. Like Inferno, you're going to get faster autos, so maybe if you're like caught between some things, and Ranger is one of the option, maybe that's you're thinking, okay, I'm going to really be able to make use of that Inferno space playing Ranger. Even if you can't use it in the late game, it's going to help carry you there to some extent, in the early and mid. So that's something to consider.
I wouldn't let the hex itself grief you from positioning correctly, but it is like an added benefit, of course.
Yeah, if you get a good hex in a good spot, use it. And if it's not in a good spot, stop using it like after round 3, basically. Like after round 3, just let your positioning be what it should be regardless of the hexes in most cases. But yeah.
And as we're talking about that, just more specifically for comps, a lot of the times every patch is going to have a certain meta, what is strong that meta and what is super good. I know that you have a certain opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is just like when you are queuing up for your game, you should have something in your head that you should have some ideas in your head of what the comps are that you know and that you want to play. And I think those comps in your head should be good meta comps, right? Like, and as you're progressing through the game, you should be looking to build to those comps to the best of your ability. There's obviously like innovation is great. Thank you to those people who innovate great builds so that I can later play them. Because it's not me. I just want to do like what's solid and stable, and I think that's the best way to go about it. Obviously, like when we talk about like building a comp, you're not always going to hit the exact 7 or 8 units or whatever that go in that comp, so you're going to have to do the best you can. You're going to have to be flexible to some extent. And you're going to have to be able to pivot to some extent. But I think like you shouldn't have, like, you should know meta comps well, and you shouldn't have like weird variations on meta comps in your head unless like, I don't know, unless you're some kind of TFT genius and are breaking the meta constantly or something. But for the most part, for most of us, what's going to be most consistent is just trying to play to those meta comps to the best of our ability. And then as we're playing to them, learning to become more flexible, learning to pivot off of them better when it doesn't quite work out.
And that's where I would totally agree with that. Like there is a tried and true method. So, that synergy, that combination of synergy is really good. But if you're not hitting it, don't just tank till you hopefully find the unit,
Right.
Try to do something that will get you out of that bottom 8. Yes. Even a 6th is better,
Even a 7th feels like
a lot better than an 8th. Anything 8th,
8th is just a bad time. I guess the other thing about the meta real quick is just like, if you know what comps are in the meta, then you know what your opponents in the lobby are trying to play in a lot of cases as well. And so that's helpful in a couple of ways, in terms of like knowing early on, like if it's an ocean mage heavy patch or meta, the value of Mystic right away, right? Before the game starts, very high likelihood that people are going to be playing Ocean Mage, very high likelihood that all that spell damage is going to be good to mitigate with Mystic. And so just having an idea in your head of what my opponents are playing, so how should that affect my end comp when it comes to like these little sort of tweaks, and I think the tweaks tend to mostly be defensive. Like the biggest two I think of are Mystic and Poison, and while Poison can do a lot of damage, it also is great into spell damage, same as Mystic. You could play more Wardens in some instances, or I know when like Azir and Friends was really, or Sivir and Friends, whatever, either one was really a big thing. Like Cloud became a bigger deal to play into.
Yeah.
And so just like having those things in your head to go, okay, like how do I deal with this? Because you're not always going to have the best comp in your lobby. In fact, you'll very rarely have the best comp in your lobby. But if you can make the best small decisions, like have the best small synergies, those like 2-unit synergies that you can like really fit into a still strong core comp, that's going to help you again avoid those 8ths, get those 4ths, basically.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree. And I just wanted to mention, if you are seeing that game where maybe you're playing, for example, Lights, and you're not finding a Yorick, and you have some items on the bench that you're saving for him, and you're really close to death, I would definitely consider making items just to survive, just so that I can get a top 7 or a top 6. Just because when you are close to that point of death, and maybe someone else is as well, the longer you can preserve your health and the longer you can keep going is a better shot at, not losing all that LP you just gained from the entire day.
Yeah, for sure. And just generally don't die with gold, and don't die with items on your bench if you can prevent it, Yeah, the like saving for the perfect upside, for the best case scenario, is going to fail you more often than it like pans out, right?
Because you want, like, especially for a comp like Shadow, you're not going to get perfect Kindred items every single game. But if you are a really good Shadow player, you will try to make do with what you get, sort of guide yourself in that direction, and hopefully not be too greedy. Because a lot of times you can think about it this way: if you're on stage 4, when you're on stage 4, when you get to the crows, I don't know, the chickens, the
technically
birds.
Raptors, but yeah,
the raptors. You're going to get a bunch of items, or maybe no items, or maybe one item, and you're just going to have to make whatever item that you have to make do with. Sometimes by slamming an item early on, you're technically sort of just making an item that you would have had to have made later on, if you think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think like the primary reason that we wanted to talk about this was, at least I had noticed, because I watch a lot of various streams, not even like necessarily like the highest rated or most watched streamers. I'm in there, like, you got 2 viewers, I'm one of them sometimes. But I see a lot of people like talking about they get their first unit and first item off the first carousel of the game, and then they're talking about, looks like a blank game, looks like a ranger game, looks like a this game. And I see that all the way from the best players to bronze players. And I think like we talked about it a little bit, but I think the high MMR, high ranked players know that they're being sort of facetious, right? They're not actually going to go this because they've got one item and one unit, but they do have an item that could play into that, and they'd like to see more of that item, or more of those items.
And I mean, a lot of the times in that situation, it's just, okay, I have these items, this is what's meta, I have this option to hopefully play it. But when it's like after Krugs and they're not hitting anything that could possibly even use those items, then we start like crossing some possibilities out. And that's, I think, a lot of the high level play of the game, where you're thinking of different ways to pivot around.
Yeah, and I guess my big concern is that, like, how sometimes with your friends, you start saying something really stupid as a joke, and then it just sticks, and then it's just like a thing that becomes part of your friend group vocabulary. I worry that that's how like that other people are like watching these high MMR players get like a tier or a bow off the first carousel and go, looks like it's a ranger game, and then they're actually taking that mentality seriously,
right,
and not understanding that high MMR player is making 100 more decisions before they commit to Rangers.
So definitely don't take that statement at face value. They are processing a bunch of different things in their head when they're saying that. They're just throwing out that option because, if you get a bow and a tier, then it's like, okay, like Rangers are pretty good right now. I want to play that, but that's just because they know that's what's going to help them get that top one. But if they aren't getting any, sort of Rangers, or they're rolling down, they aren't seeing any ashes, then they might need to think about something else. Yeah.
For sure. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in regards to like how to decide a team comp?
I think that was mostly it. I mean, we covered most of everything, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
as a quick summary, understand your items, don't ignore what units you're getting necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
and be
Scout.
open,
Scout.
scout for sure. Be open, but also know when it's time to be decisive, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
starting to get late, you're starting to lose health, you gotta play something.
Yeah.
So with that being said, let's get into a very quick rundown of the patch 10.3 patch notes. Say patch twice there because that's what it is. Yeah. Again, same as last time, we're not going to uh, be the place to get a word for word rundown of this. We're just going to very quickly, because a lot of other people do a good job of this, very quickly go
Mm-hmm.
over it. So, um, do you want to like start us out with like what you think was important from these system changes?
I mean, most specifically was just that spat change. There's never going to be a spat from Carousel anymore. So when you're playing the game, definitely always keep that in mind that you can't just hit those 6-unit synergies anymore. You have to basically wait for a drop of a spat. And I'm not sure if this is true, but it does feel like the drops are a bit higher. I'm noticing them a bit more, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they adjusted the drop rates of
Okay.
content and
Okay.
gold boxes. More gold, more spatulas, less champions.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the other big thing, well, not really a big thing, but Krugs guaranteed to drop two or have two drops instead of one drop, and
Mm-hmm.
I think this all just goes along with some of the things that they've been doing over the last couple patches to sort of like flatten out how these like random
Random.
drops
Yeah.
are affecting you over the game. So you're having like a more stable game from
Mm-hmm.
beginning to end in general now. None of the item changes are particularly big. I know you think Static Shiv's like a little bit overtuned, where you were saying that. Do you still feel
Yeah.
that way?
I personally just feel like because Rangers were already really good and the meta really suits them. So if you're with that buff, you can play like that Ash, and it's just I don't know. I just noticed a lot of it was really dominating a lot of the games that I was playing.
Yeah, and so that got buffed a
Yeah.
little bit. Maybe that's something they'll look to revert. Who
I also
knows?
noticed the IE is not as good as before, but
Yeah,
still usable. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Um, in terms of traits, 3 assassins are a little better. 6 assassins are a little bit worse. Um, 6 shadow are a little bit worse. Light in general are a little bit worse, or maybe a lot worse potentially. I think they're still
Mhm.
playable, but they're definitely not like S tier like they were. I would say.
Mhm.
The big thing though is like the lunar ability power bonus stack,
Yeah,
burst
I
stack.
definitely have noticed that playing Lunar now is a lot more value than it was before. And especially with, like, Leo is a good unit in and of itself. And with Karma giving that Mystic synergy, it's a lot of, like, you might just want to consider playing Lunar late game.
Right.
Yeah.
Which was already like a thing that Light was doing to some extent, but maybe
Hmm.
now it's something that like Rangers can possibly make better use of.
Hmm.
Now that IE is worse, trying to pick up some
Yeah.
additional
And
crit that
I
way.
know, like, Four Rangers was really popular last set. Oh, sorry, last patch. But um, I personally think that when you're later in the game, you can take out those 2 extra Rangers to hopefully play something better, like Mystic or Lunar. Yeah.
Yeah. Unit changes. The only one that I'm aware of that's actually pretty big is like the Ornn buff, where
Hmm.
his like spell buff or spell debuff duration's 10 seconds and the damage amplification's like 25% now. That was like a pretty big deal in the early game, I felt like the couple of times I've played him.
Hmm.
Uh otherwise it's just like tweaks, mana adjustments, a little bit of attack speed adjustment here and there, spell damage and HP adjustments. Was there anything else that like really stood out to you in terms of champion balance?
Um, lights kind of got nerfed. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had initially, Mort had posted about like a bigger nerf to Yorick, which actually didn't end up going through. Yorick actually got a buff. He's got 50 more HP now. Oh no, I'm sorry. His tier 2. This is all Yorick. So Yorick did not get a buff. I misspoke. He has 50 more HP, which is okay, but he also has 10 more mana from 75 to 85 mana, and his minions at tier 2 are 100 HP less. I think there were some bigger nerfs they were talking about putting through for Yorick, but ultimately didn't.
I mean, more specifically, just like Vayne. I know, like, Vayne is a 1 cost.
Yeah.
And you could just play her in lights and she would just be popping off with, like, the perfect items. So definitely gutted that a little.
Yeah, I mean, she lost a 5/100ths of an attack speed or whatever. So yeah, definitely a little bit of a nerf to her. And then bug fixes. The only one I saw, I mean, I guess Kog'Maw not being able to target untargetable units is pretty good. And Karma, you can now Karma your Lucian if you're going to play Mystic and Light with Lucian, because she can target untargetable units with her shield and Link now. But the one that I thought was most impactful was that multiple Titans resolves are no longer multiplicative. I don't know if you saw this in your games, but I was playing games where it would just be like 2-star Nasus with 2 Titans resolves on it, and it would still be like unkillable in like round 4.
I have never seen that, but
it's
thankfully.
I've seen it on a couple of tanky units, and I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I ever lost a lobby to that, but it was like momentarily frustrating.
Right.
But I think, like, for a quick rundown, that pretty much is going to cover the patch notes.
Yeah. They didn't try to touch it too much because they like where the game is at right now. So yeah, and then just moving on to the last segment of the podcast, we wanted to go over our top 8 TFT carousel items for the current patch, of course. We had to, change a lot of it depending on the patch, but for the most part, I think this will be good for 10.3.
Yeah, I mean, items, the value of items is always going to be a little bit patch dependent. It depends on what the best comps are in the patch, especially when you're thinking like, what am I going to take off the very first carousel to kind of get my comp started? And so we had at number 8, and we both agreed that this was the item we least wanted off the carousel was the Negatron cloak.
Yeah. And I mean, my reasoning for that is just, it doesn't really do anything for you. Now that you can't get stat from carousel, you can't just decide, okay, I'm going to play lights.
Right.
And then because of that too, you aren't going to make Runans that much anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
Berserkers aren't that good into Rangers, and I don't think are seeing as much play right now. So Hush was the other item. And honestly, like, Olaf has gone through so many different iterations of like what's best on him. I don't even think Hush is necessarily,
I personally do not think Hush is good on him,
a high priority item anymore.
Yeah.
So there's
not even.
And I mean, frankly, with like Rangers and things being more important now, there's like less magic damage going around in a lot of lobbies. So even Dragon Claw isn't as high a priority as it was at some point. So it's like one of the big considerations in like this list is, if you got like 3 of these, how would your game be going, right? Like, because if you take an item off the first carousel, you have no control over all the item drops you get later. So if you end up with like 3 or 4 Negatron cloaks, you just, I don't know, you go next, I guess.
Yeah, basically.
You get a bunch of Dragon Claws.
So
I mean,
I just personally wouldn't take that Negatron cloak if that were my first pick.
Right. I mean, yeah, you can. It's hard to get stuck with the Negatron cloak because you can always get a belt instead, typically. But speaking of that, that's, well, I was just gonna say. I was just gonna say real quick. Maybe we would agree the best item you can make with Negatron cloak is Zephyr.
Yeah,
it's up there at least.
Yeah, up there definitely. I think definitely better than Dragon. I mean, I was just thinking of Dragon's Claw, but I definitely think Zephyr is just better just because.
Yeah. It seems like it does
It's
more.
just so good late game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, but and I messed up our transition entirely, but we got a nice segue. Speaking of belt,
Yeah, for Giant's Belt was actually our 7th pick for both of us. And the reason for that is just because I typically like to pick up something offensive that can do damage early on. And while it is half of a Morello's, the items that it combines into are just not super flexible or really do much for your team. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, realistically, you pretty much only want one Morellonomicon in a game.
Yeah.
You can't put two Morellonomicons on the same unit. They're unique. And I guess if you end up with more than one belt, you get to try to get some Negatron cloaks so that you can make Zephyr, because that's probably the second best item that it makes. So
Yeah.
and we agree, like I would rather have, if I take needlessly large rod, like if I want my first item to be Morellonomicon and I take needlessly large rod and then I get, you know, 3 rods over the course of the game, great, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna build a death cap or whatever. I'm gonna have good use for those rods. If I get 3 belts over the course of the game, I'm gonna be feeling a little bit less happy about things. So just always bearing that in mind.
Yeah. And you always like it's so much easier to get a belt to finish that Morello's versus trying to get a rod from
Yeah.
Carousel.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then the next item, I put it as my 5th choice, but I know you put it as your 6th. But
Right.
overall, it is our 5th pick, and that's Chain Vest.
Yeah, it's right in here. It
Yeah.
averaged out to 5.5, so it'll be like 6th on this list technically.
Yeah.
And Chain Vest, I mean, it's part of Guardian Angel. It's part of Locket. I'm not seeing as many Lockets as I used to.
Definitely not.
Bramble Vest is actually like pretty good right now.
I think Bramble Vest is pretty good, and that's why I valued it a bit more, just because I think Bramble Vest is good.
Yeah.
And I would take it over any of the last two items. And I know GA will always be sort of useful, especially in these types of lobbies.
Yeah, and if you end up with multiple GAs, great. If you end up with multiple Bramble Vests, that's probably okay. But yeah, with Rangers having more value, I know I saw something about a Hyperroll Woodlands build that tries to transition to 6 assassins from some sort of challenger player, and they were taking Chain Vest off the first carousel because Bramble Vest was like the core item to the build. So you know,
depends what you like going. Yeah.
But yeah, I would say stock increased on Chain Vest in this particular patch, as Bramble Vest is better.
Yeah. Yeah. And then moving on to our fifth pick. Yeah. BF Sword. So obviously BF Sword, super good item. Not super good, but it like definitely for the last patch, great, you know, for IE. Now that IE's been a bit nerfed, it's a bit less ideal. But you know, Twitch is still super strong. He's still gonna use that item really well. And you can make that GA on Yorick, makes him go off guaranteed. Shojins, like all good items that you can go for, and it kind of gives you flexibility in terms of what you could play.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a comp where I would be like upset if I had to make a GA.
A sword.
Right? Yeah, you know, I mean, BF Sword in general is going to have Shojin as a good option in a lot of comps. GA, any comp that doesn't want Shojin can probably use IE or GA. So very good, solid first pick. Technically tied with Recurve Bow.
I put Recurve Bow as pretty low just because, I mean, I love Rangers and I think they're fun, but you can't really force it. And now that light isn't really an option anymore, I'm even more hesitant to take bow, because if you get another bow, or if you get a belt, or if you get a chain vest, what early item are you making?
So I think maybe I might overvalue RFC, but I like RFC on Kindred, on Olaf, on Azir even. I tried to play Rangers in a game just the other day, and I never hit any good Rangers or a second tier. So I ended up with Static Shiv RFC, and I just put those on Azir, and played Azir 2 all the way to top 3 and was fine with that for a game where I just straight up missed Rangers.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just don't like. I personally don't like RFC. I think that's just me.
Yeah, I think. I mean, Olaf is obviously not as strong as it was, so that's like less of a consideration now. But yeah, I'm very willing to play RFC if it comes down to it. Like I'm not making early RFCs, but I'll make one in the mid game. I'll make one before I'm forced to, for sure.
Yeah.
And then I think technically this is our third spot. We gave the sparring gloves.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to talk about why we like sparring gloves?
I mean, I personally, and I think just the strength of it is that maybe if you get 2, you can make that thieves gloves, and then that gives you technically 2 early items, and then it gives you that dodge and also that crit. So I just feel like when I'm picking a first carousel item, I'm trying to open up as many opportunities as I can, and sparring glove will always be useful in some sense. Hodge is great too.
Yeah, Hodge is good.
Yeah.
Even QSS now, Quicksilver Sash is pretty good.
QSS is really good.
Builds out of that, so it's a very versatile item. There was a point like early in the set where I think people were undervaluing Thieves Gloves and Sparring Gloves as well, and I was just I'd have like 3 units with Thieves Gloves on it at the end of the game because I was just like, look at the value. I take 2 items, I make 4 items. Like it's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
and
still strong.
like Thieves Gloves is really good for units that can crit. So like Electric or Lux, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I forgot to mention, sorry, for the GA, now that Yasuo is super popular.
Oh yeah.
He's like one of the core items for Yasuo. So
you know what? Hodge too with sparring.
Yeah,
gloves.
Hodge. Yeah, exactly.
I've seen people playing a lot of Hand of Justice on him.
Yeah.
I've yet to play Yasuo. I don't know.
It's a hit or miss comp, I think.
Yeah, I just haven't learned that much about it and haven't bothered to play it as a result. I don't think you have to be able to play. It's not like a comp you need to be able to play.
Yeah.
But
it is strong if you get those perfect items in that Yasuo. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's also not that great. I don't we're maybe getting a lot off topic, but I think it's like I think Rangers is pretty good into it because if Ashe is your carry, then and you get Tarek up, then you've got, Crystal on Ashe, and she doesn't get burst down by him necessarily. At least that's been my experience in the games that I've played so far. But
I guess it just depends who high rolls more because, if you get that Yas 3 and then he just hits your
that's true.
Carry immediately because he targets the person with the most items, and it's just game over.
One thing I wanted to ask though is if you just get like a random pair of Thieves Gloves, is there like are there particular units that you're looking to put those on?
Definitely for me, I try to put it on a unit that I think would use those items, and also a unit that isn't my main carry, because I want to put the best items on my carry because they can utilize it best. But like I have put Thieves Gloves on like Malphite or Yorick just because they are 4 costs and they are good frontline, and they could use those items better than if I put it on like I don't know, Malzahar.
Yeah, no, I think generically I look to put the Thieves Gloves on frontline units because I think they do a better job. I mean, if you put like Thieves Gloves on a backline unit and then they roll 2 tank items, you basically don't get like your whole team is dead, and then you've got like tanky Kindred doing flips around, which Kindred actually does okay in a lot of cases with Thieves Gloves because you can use AP or spell damage or attack damage items, which she'll sometimes get. But I still tend to prefer it on stuff like you were saying, like Malphite, Yorick, anything that's going to be in my front line that can make a use of broad range of items like that. So yeah, and then the next item on our list is going to be Needlessly Large Rod, which we both agreed was our second favorite item for this patch.
And I mean, the reason for that is just because it's super versatile, and AP comps are fun to play. They're open-ended, and you're never going to complain about rods, and Shadow is super strong. So
right. And basically every item that we talked about earlier and said it was like the second half of a good item, the first half was pretty much a Needlessly Large Rod, right? Like Locket, Morellonomicon, that sort of thing. You basically cannot end up with too many needlessly large rods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to, I know the stream has been going on for a bit long. I just want to move on to the next one really quickly. Our last item is Tear of the Goddess, and that's just because currently Rangers and Shiv are really meta. So, and just because Tear is so flexible, you can build that Hodge, you can build Shojin, you can build Seraphs for Shadow. A lot of different things will need that Tear, and the more versatile you are for your first item, the better chance you have of, increasing your odds of playing like a comp that you actually hit.
Yeah, absolutely. Seraphs is really good on Shadows for Kindred if you're going to play that, or just generally, like Seraphs is a good item. So if you hit a bunch of tiers because you took a first tier, you'll have Seraph, Shojin, all kinds of fun stuff. You can make Redemption even. Yeah, so that pretty much covers our exciting top 8. Thanks everyone for hanging out, tuning in. Thanks to TFT JohnSenna for the footage that we were able to use of that game today. You may have picked up on his Twitch from the video, but we'll also, if you're checking this out on YouTube, we'll have his Twitch linked in the description on YouTube, so you can check him out if you want to catch up on how he's doing. If you would like to have us take a look at one of your games, come hang out on Discord. We're discord.me/top8podcast, all one word, all spelled out. So you can hit us up there. Again, that'll be linked in the description on YouTube if you're watching there. And then, if you're watching on YouTube, we're twitch.tv/top8podcast every other Monday. So the Monday after a patch, we should be here talking to you 8 p.m. Pacific about something TFT related. Yeah. We're on Twitter at Top 8 Podcast, and then we're also Top 8 Podcast on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Top 8 everywhere.
Yeah, just Top 8 Podcast, 8 spelled out. That's us. Thanks again for hanging out.